Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty intense. You guys sent in this written argument, and wow, it's a really direct claim.
It is, yeah.
Basically, that Islam just inherently teaches hatred towards anyone who's not a Muslim. That's a huge statement.
Yeah, it's definitely weighty, and it's sensitive right off the bat. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important for everyone to get right from the start here what we're doing today.
Yeah, for sure.
Our goal is to examine the claims being made
Yeah.
and look at the evidence that's being used specifically in this document.
Yes, just what's in here.
Exactly. We're not here to agree or disagree
Not at all. Yeah.
with the argument.
Nope, we're not taking sides.
Yeah.
We're just trying to understand.
Yeah, this deep dive is purely about understanding what this specific text is arguing and the foundation for their argument.
Yeah.
So just to be totally clear, we're working strictly within the boundaries of this document.
Exactly.
We're not bringing in outside information,
Not giving our own opinions. We're just laying it all out.
laying it out.
So, with that said, let's just jump right in. And I gotta say, this central argument, it's pretty stark.
It is. It's pretty bold.
Hmm.
The source contends that Islam's core texts, like the foundation of the religion and the doctrines that come from it, actively foster hostility towards anyone who's not a Muslim.
Yeah. And they don't just leave it there. They go on to make a pretty clear contrast, right, between what they present as the core teachings of Judeo-Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. They specifically call out the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament.
Right.
And then also the example that Jesus sets in the Gospels.
So, like, for Christians, those are the foundational moral teachings.
That's what they're saying. Yeah, and then they go on to say that Islam essentially inverts these teachings.
And they even get specific. They bring up the example of Muhammad.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of how they set up the argument.
Yeah.
It's this whole concept of Islam having this kind of like inverted morality.
Like a mirror image almost.
Yeah, where, they're saying Christianity has these core principles of love and compassion, which everyone's pretty familiar with.
Mhm.
But then Islam, in their view, it actively rejects and acts in opposition to those principles.
Okay, and that's a big claim right there.
Oh, it's huge. And then they immediately start backing it up by looking at the nature of Islamic scripture.
Yeah, and this is where they get into this difference between the Bible and the Quran. So how would you explain how they frame that?
Okay, so the source is saying that the Bible is mostly historical and descriptive.
Okay.
And it kind of culminates in the teachings and the life of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
But the Quran, they present it as being primarily prescriptive.
Prescriptive. So meaning
It's not just stories. Like the verses aren't just accounts of things that happened.
Oh, I see.
They're meant to be direct commands.
Oh.
Doctrines that Muslims are expected to live by, to follow.
So it's like do this, not just this happened.
Exactly. And that really sets the stage for how they interpret specific verses
Gotcha.
later on in their argument.
Which brings us to that first verse they pull out, Quran chapter 60, verse 4.
Right.
So what does that verse actually say, and then how do they interpret it?
Okay, so the verse, it says, "Indeed, we are disassociated from you and from what you worship from, besides Allah. We have rejected you, and there has arisen between us and you enmity and hatred forever until you believe in Allah alone."
Okay, so strong words.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the source, their interpretation is, it's a definitive statement of enmity and hatred from God, from Allah, toward anyone who doesn't believe in him. And it's permanent.
Forever.
Until they believe, yeah. And here's the key part of their argument, right? Muslims are supposed to follow the will of Allah. So this enmity and hatred, it becomes an obligation for them too.
So, like, it's not optional?
Not in their view, no. And to back this up, they bring in a specific scholarly interpretation.
Right, they mention a scholar.
Ibn Kathir.
Okay.
They say, according to his interpretation, this verse requires Muslims to, like, actively disavow non-Muslims until they convert. And they emphasize this isn't a suggestion.
It's a command.
Right. A command for ongoing enmity.
Okay, so that's their first piece of evidence. They then move on to another verse, Quran chapter 9, verse 5, which is sometimes called the verse of the sword.
Right.
What's in that one?
Okay, this one says, "When the sacred months have passed, then kill the polytheists wherever you find them, and capture them and besiege them and sit in wait for them at every place of ambush."
Okay, so again, very, very strong wording. What's their interpretation of that?
They interpret it very literally. It's a command to kill polytheists after this period of sacred months is over.
Hmm.
And the source mentions that those months, according to them, ended way back in the 7th century.
Okay. And this is also where they bring in the idea of abrogation.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So can you explain what they mean by that?
So they mention the scholar Al-Tabari. Again, it's how it's presented in this text.
Right, right.
But they say, according to his view, this verse, the verse of the sword, it abrogates or overrides earlier verses in the Quran that might have been more about peace or tolerance.
So abrogation means like a newer rule cancels out an older one.
Exactly. And in this context, it's like the later revelations in the Quran, they supersede or change earlier ones.
Okay.
So the source argues that the verse of the sword, it's considered a later revelation, and it takes precedence over anything before it.
So it's like the final word on the matter for them.
Pretty much, yeah. That's how they see it.
And then they don't just leave it in theory, right? They connect it to actual events.
Yeah.
Both historical and even in the present day.
Right.
So what are some of the examples they pull out?
Well, they point to what ISIS, the Islamic State, did to the Yazidis back in 2014. They say that was a direct result of this verse being put into practice.
And that was horrific, like the violence and the killings, the enslavement.
Absolutely. And then they broaden it out even further.
Yeah.
They talk about how all sorts of religious minorities, Jews, Christians, Druze, Alawites, have been and are still being displaced throughout the Middle East and Africa.
Yeah.
And they attribute that to the principles they see laid out in this verse and others like it.
So this verse, for them, it's not just words on a page.
No, it's a blueprint for action.
Okay. Then they go on to another verse, Quran, chapter 9, verse 29. What does this one say?
All right, this one's a little longer. Fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day from among the people of the book, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued.
The people of the book, so that's referring to Jews and Christians specifically.
Right, yeah. And the source interprets this as a direct command to fight them, specifically because of what they believe, with the goal being to subdue them until they pay this tax, a jizya.
So subjugation and taxation. And they give a modern-day example to illustrate this too, right?
Yeah, they bring up how Christians in Iran have been treated. Specifically in 2024, there were reports from Open Doors about churches being forcibly closed down.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
And the source is saying this is what it looks like when that verse is put into practice in the modern world.
Okay, so we've got these specific verses, and then they move on to talk about a broader doctrine in Islam, this al-wala al-bara. What is that all about?
Yeah, al-wala wal-bara.
Yeah.
It translates to loyalty and disavowal. And the source is presenting it as a really fundamental Islamic principle, something that underpins like all sorts of things in Sharia law.
Okay.
And basically it requires Muslims to love what Allah loves, which they identify as, other Muslims.
Right.
And then to hate what Allah hates, which they say is disbelievers, anyone who's not a Muslim.
Okay, and the source really takes issue with this doctrine, especially in relation to the idea that Islam is an Abrahamic faith. Right?
Yeah, they see a huge contradiction there. They're saying if Islam is supposed to be in the same family as Judaism and Christianity, coming from Abraham, then how can it have this principle that calls for rejection and even hatred of anyone outside the faith?
Right.
And they get pretty graphic, even using that analogy of Cain and Abel.
Like from the Bible.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then they bring in Quran, chapter 5, verse 51.
Yep.
To kind of further support this point about loyalty and disavowal.
Right. That verse says, "O you who have believed, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of one another."
So again, separating Muslims from
everyone else.
From everyone else. And they give an example of how this is actually being applied today.
Yeah, they mention a fatwa, a religious ruling issued by a Saudi cleric, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Munajjid.
Okay.
This was back in 2023. And he used this verse to argue against Muslims having, close friendships or alliances with non-Muslims.
So again, that separation. And the source makes it clear that this isn't just some fringe idea.
No, not at all. They argue this is mainstream. They say it's taught in schools, in Islamic education, using Saudi textbooks as a specific example. Their argument is that this instills a mindset of separation, disavowal, even animosity towards non-Muslims from like a very young age.
Okay, so it's not just about we're different. It's about they're bad, almost.
That's how the source is portraying it, yeah.
Yeah.
They even use those terms, untermensch and despise kafir, which is
Yeah.
a pretty harsh language.
Yeah, dehumanizing.
And they say that any positive interactions, it's all just like a temporary tactic.
Like fake niceness.
Yeah, a form of diplomacy that can't last.
Okay, now, the source does acknowledge that some people listening might be thinking, well, hold on, I know Muslims who are kind and peaceful, so how do they address that?
Right. They use it, well, it's a pretty provocative analogy.
Okay.
They compare a kind Muslim to, imagine, a sweet Nazi.
A nice Nazi.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, they even give him a name, Joachim. Like,
Yeah.
he's a good family man, but his individual acts of kindness, they don't erase the Holocaust.
Right, they don't change the core beliefs of Nazism.
Exactly. And that's the argument they're making here, that personal behavior, even if it's positive, it doesn't change what they consider to be the core, the written doctrine of Islam when it comes to non-Muslims.
Okay, then they shift gears and start talking about historical and contemporary examples. They say this is proof of, quote, hatred in action.
Right. Historically, they point to the Islamic conquests from like the 7th and 8th century.
So spreading across Arabia into North Africa.
Yeah, and Spain and even parts of France.
Wow.
And they argue that this was all about force and subjugation, that conquest, whether it's through the military or through persuasion, is a fundamental method within Islam.
Persuasion.
Yeah.
In quotes.
Right, exactly. And then they bring it to the present day.
Okay.
They talk about the Taliban in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
executing people who've left Islam, apostates. They cite Human Rights Watch, this was in 2024, and they link it directly to that verse we talked about, Quran 9:5.
The verse of the sword.
Yep. And then they talk about Boko Haram in Nigeria.
Killing Christians.
Yeah. And they cite Amnesty International, also in 2024, and connect it to the call to fight in Quran 9:29. Their point is, this isn't just extremism, it's people applying the core texts of Islam directly.
And they even bring up the conflict in Syria as further evidence of this.
Yeah, they say it's all connected to these underlying beliefs.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. They wrap up by discussing what they see as this fundamental clash between Islamic teachings, as they interpret them, and Western values.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So what's the core of their argument there?
They're saying that Western values, which they trace back to Judeo-Christian ideas,
Yeah.
like universal love your neighbors, yourself, that kind of
Right, right.
They say those are completely opposed to Islamic teachings, which they've characterized as promoting hostility towards anyone who's not a Muslim.
Okay.
And their argument is that Westerners, we tend to see everyone as equal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a core value.
Right. And we also see Islam as being in that same family, like the Abrahamic faiths, all connected.
Yeah, all coming from Abraham.
So we deny that this hostility even exists.
We just brush it off.
Yeah, we say it's a misinterpretation of the texts.
But the source is saying, no, that's naive.
Exactly. They say that's dangerous because it stops us from seeing the real threat.
Okay, so to sum up this whole argument, what's the central takeaway, according to this text?
All right, the core argument is Islam, based on their interpretation of specific texts like Quran 60.4 and the doctrine of al-wala wal-bara, teaches hatred, animosity, and the subjugation of non-Muslims. And they're using both historical events and modern-day actions of individuals and groups to say, look, this is what it looks like when those teachings are put into practice.
Right, and they're urging people, especially in the West, to wake up to this supposed threat.
Yeah, to face the truth, as they put it. Not to promote hatred, but to have a clear view of what's happening. And they even go so far as to say that the time for Islamic diplomacy is ending.
Wow. Okay, well, that's a lot to digest.
Definitely.
And it's important for everyone listening to remember this has been a deep dive into one very specific argument.
Absolutely.
We've just been trying to understand the claims and interpretations made in this particular document. We're not endorsing any of it.
Nope, just presenting it.
Exactly.
But it does leave us with some serious questions.
For sure.
I mean, if what they're saying about these texts, about their impact on the relationship between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world, if that's accurate, then what does that mean going forward?
What are the implications? Yeah, that's something for everyone to think about on their own.
It definitely is.
Okay, well, this has been heavy, but really important. Thanks for walking us through it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, keep those questions coming. We'll keep diving deep